Stunned by surprise, the millionaire saw a crying boy at his wife's grave. Upon learning the reason for his grief, he collapsed to the ground. Yuri got out of his car at the cemetery where his wife was buried. He slowly walked toward the wrought iron gate, lost in thought about his life. He hardly felt the light rain, only mechanically buttoning his coat, which suddenly seemed useless. His head ached from 3 sleepless nights, and his temples throbbed with dull, unbearable pain. And then he reached his destination. His gaze fell on the freshly mounded grave, and his throat tightened so much that he was afraid he would suffocate. Just 3 days ago, she was alive, glowing with her warm smile, the same smile that had warmed them for 20 long years. But once upon a time, everything had been different. She had been his rock, his closest confidant, always ready to support him and go through all the trials with him. He would come home tired and irritable, and she would silently embrace him, and his anger would melt away like snow in the sun. "You're not made of steel, Yura." She gently stroked his tousled hair as he lay exhausted after a hard day, his face pressed against her knees. "You're just very worn out. Let yourself rest," she whispered. Dreams of traveling, of children, of grandchildren. They had built all of this for when he finally handed over his powers. He had created all this wealth, this power, for her, for their bright future. But fate dealt a cruel blow. The diagnosis? Cystic fibrosis. A year of struggle in which he threw all his strength, all his resources, all his connections into defeating an invisible enemy. The most advanced clinics, innovative medicines, leading medical specialists, all of this was at his disposal. He leaned over her bed, squeezed her emaciated hand in his, and watched as the very spark in her eyes that had once saved him faded away. He prayed to the doctors, to the gods, to everyone he could pray to, but medicine proved powerless. 3 days ago, the sterile whiteness of the hospital ward and the heavy smell of death. She opened her eyes, which had almost lost their sight, and touched his hand. Her voice was barely audible, like a whisper, her words broken into phrases. "Yura, don't cry. You are brave. I love you." Her hand went limp. The monitor beeped, emitting a sharp, icy note like a warning. He froze, unable to believe it. And then everything he had built, all his achievements, wealth, power, dissolved like smoke. All that remained was emptiness, all-consuming and cold. And before him, engraved in gold on the marble slab, was her name and the dates of their all-too-short history. He stood staring at the fresh earth, lost and devastated, unable to comprehend how he could go on, why he should live. The smell of dampness and rotting leaves hung in the air, like a premonition of the inevitable end. The cool breeze whispered meaningless words through the bare branches of the trees. He closed his eyes, trying to hold on to her image, her bright smile, but instead, the last terrible images flashed through his mind. Her pallor, the blue circles under her eyes, the bulky machines. Suddenly, a quiet but desperate sound caught his attention. Not far from a modest gravestone, almost hidden by a large bouquet of flowers, sat a small child, 7 or 8 years old. He was hunched over, hugging his knees, his thin shoulders shaking with indescribable pain. The cemetery silence was broken by sobs, desperate, filled with such vivid, unbearable pain that Yuri couldn't help but shudder. The child cried as if tearing himself away from the whole world, his tears boundless, all-consuming. Yuri froze, his own suffering momentarily fading into the background in the face of this child's all-consuming grief. What tragedy could have caused a child to grieve so at a grave? Yuri cautiously approached the boy, his expensive shoes sinking silently into the damp grass. A feeling of foreboding suddenly arose in Yuri's chest, one he did not understand. "Boy?" His own voice came out hoarse and quiet as if from under a heavy weight. "Why are you crying?" The boy raised his head sharply, his tear-stained face and huge gray eyes filled with such desperate pain that Yuri felt physical pain. The child, sobbing, wiped his face with the sleeve of his dirty jacket and looked at the stranger with fear and at the same time with faith in salvation. I don't know where my mom is," he whispered, bursting into tears again. She should be here," he whispered, clenching his fists. "Who's your mom? What's her name?" Yuri tried to hide the emotion in his voice, kneeling down to be at the same height as the boy. The child sniffed, holding back tears. "Mom, Anya Sotnikova." Yuri's mind went blank. The world seemed to split in two. He felt the ground slip away from under his feet. His ears rang, and his vision darkened. His Anya? His wife? The mother of this boy? It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a lie, a nightmare. He wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. The boy's eyes revealed his pallor and fear. Who are you?" whispered the child. Yuri was silent, unable to answer. A frightening thought settled in his heart, cold and sharp as an icy knife. Memories of the last year of her life came flooding back, her strange sadness, not always related to her illness. One conversation he had ignored at the time, preoccupied with an urgent contract. "Yura, if we had a child," she said, looking out the window of the hospital room. Now it's too late, he thought. The sun had already set. He replied, gently touching her forehead, his thoughts completely absorbed by the upcoming meeting with investors. "Yes, it's too late," she whispered, barely audibly, turning away to the wall. He didn't pay any attention to it. Convinced that they had both accepted the inevitability of not having children, he nevertheless wondered, what if... His gaze froze on the boy, on his gray eyes, on his features. Something vague, familiar, from her, in the curve of his lips, in the shape of his ears. His heart began to beat wildly, as if threatening to burst out of his chest. He tried to get up, but his body felt numb. "Mom said..." The boy sobbed, his gaze on Yuri filling with growing horror. "She said that my father, is a very important and busy man, that he doesn't know I exist, that she didn't manage to tell him." Each of her words hit him like a blow. She was scared that you... The child didn't have time to finish the sentence before bursting into tears again. Yuri felt his bones crack as his knees hit the wet ground with a heavy thud. He collapsed next to his wife's grave in front of the crying son he had never seen before. With a muffled groan, the air left his lungs. He didn't feel the cold of the earth. His vision was limited to this small, grief-stricken face and the fresh earth on the grave of the woman who had taken his terrible secret with her. The world, which had already collapsed 3 days ago, fell apart again, leaving only emptiness and an icy feeling of unreality, intertwined with the all-consuming, destructive pain of guilt. He fell, his powerful body shaking with the first sobs, desperate, meaningless, merging with the cries of his child. Yuri lay on the cool ground, his face flooded with tears mixed with rain, his powerful shoulders shaking from sobs he had been unable to suppress for 2 decades. Next to him, sobbing, sat his son Misha, whose name he recognized through the child's cries. Everything around him boiled down to the wet grass under his cheek, the roar of the wind in the bare branches of the ancient birches, and the thin, confused voice telling the terrible truth. The fear his mother had always felt now sounded like a piercing cry. Misha, wiping his nose with the sleeve of an old jacket, looked at Yuri with his gray eyes, the same as Yuri's in his youth, full of silent reproach and endless longing. "The fear that you will leave us, or that your enemies will find out about me and hurt me," trembled in every word. Each one struck Yuri's heart like a hammer. He knelt down, ignoring the dirt on his expensive trousers, his hands trembling like crystal as he gently touched the boy's thin shoulder. Where did you live?" His voice trembled as if from restrained emotions. In an old house on the very edge of town, Misha pointed in the direction where the city was shrouded in gray smoke. "It's a small apartment, 5th floor. The elevator hasn't worked for a long time," he said, as if tearing himself away from something painful, swallowing tears and painting a picture of hopelessness that Yuri had never encountered before. His mother, he said, painted a lot and sometimes sold her paintings at the market. There was a hint of pride in his voice. I helped her. I went to the store, took out the trash." Yuri clenched his fists, his nails digging into his flesh, and Anya appeared before his eyes. His Anya, talented, dazzling, forced to sell at the market, carry heavy loads upstairs without an elevator, hide like a criminal, hiding from their son's eyes. Why did she do that? The question, heavy and repulsive, burst out, hanging in the air like fog. Misha lowered his gaze, aimlessly picking at the dirt on the sole of his boot. "She said she wanted to tell you when she found out about my existence. But then you became famous. Your face was everywhere in the news, and unpleasant people appeared." He was overcome with a tremor. He remembered a man with a tattoo on his neck who had shouted at his mother at the entrance to the building, threatening her if she bothered him. Yuri remembered Sviridov, the rude security guard he had fired a year ago for excessive cruelty. There was clear hatred in his eyes. His mother was very frightened at the time, crying at night and saying that it would be better for him to be without a father, but alive. He fell silent, his thin body trembling again. And then came the illnesses, and everything became even harder. There wasn't even enough money for basic medicines. Yuri broke into hoarse moans, suffocated by self-blame, pain, and helpless rage. He signed million-dollar contracts and built skyscrapers, while his son suffered from hunger and his wife quietly died in poverty, afraid to ask him for help. Aunt Liuda, his mother's sister, was cruel. Misha suddenly cringed as if expecting a blow. She accused his mother of stupidity, said she should have come to him to ask for money, and scolded her for being a burden. She came, took my mother's paintings, threatened to sell them, but never brought any money. Yuri felt a chill run through him to the bone, and the image of Lyudmila, Anna's younger sister, always dissatisfied, with a penetrating and seemingly predatory gleam in her eyes, which he always avoided, appeared in his mind. "Where are you now, Misha?" he asked softly, reaching out his hand, but the boy, frightened, recoiled. "At Aunt Liuda's. After the hospital. Mom asked her, but it's not good there. She's crying, Uncle Vitya, her husband. He abuses her. They say they don't need me. They want to send me to an orphanage. Or I'll bring you back, but not without payment." Misha cried again, quietly and desperately. "I don't want to go back to them. I ran away. I wanted to go to my mom." Suddenly, like the screeching of brakes, a piercing cry rang out through the cemetery silence. "Mishenka, where are you, kid? Come home!" Lyudmila appeared from around the corner of the alley, swinging a rusty bag in her hands. Her face, once reminiscent of Anna's, was now swollen from drunkenness and anger, and her hair stuck out in tufts from under her crumpled hat. Seeing Misha standing next to the dejected Yuri, dressed in a luxurious coat, she froze, her eyes narrowed, and then lit up with a predatory, triumphant gleam. "Ooh!" she sang, her voice sweet but trembling with hatred and greed. "Our master has graced us with his presence. Has he finally deigned to bestow his attention on the orphan?" With the speed of a predator she approached, her cheap perfume mingling with the smell of dampness. "Well, Yuri Olegovich, only now have you realized how your lawful wife and child lived in poverty while you built your palaces?" She looked at him with disgust. "Anya was too naive to bother you, but I'm not like that." She squeezed Misha's arm tightly above the elbow, and the boy cried out in surprise at the sudden pain. "Come on, kid. Now your father and I are going to have a serious talk." Misha tried to wriggle free, his eyes full of fear, looking imploringly at Yuri. Lyudmila wouldn't let him go. "Don't scream. Your mother is dead. Now I am in charge of your fate." She looked at Yuri, who was struggling to get up from the ground, his face hopelessly gloomy, his eyes flashing with fierce hatred. "Get the money ready, Sotnikov. For all the years I've supported your ward, and for the moral damage. Otherwise," she smiled ominously, squeezing Misha's hand even tighter, who stood frozen like a pale statue. "Otherwise, I'll start spreading rumors in the press that will cause your stock to plummet. Make up your mind, rich man." Rising up, she spat on Ani's gravestone and, without stopping, led the crying child away from there toward the cemetery exit. Yuri remained standing by his wife's grave, surrounded by silence, only the fading sound of a child's crying and the piercing icy wind, like the drumbeat of his impending battle, disturbing his peace. Yuri felt the icy wind lashing his face as if amplifying Misha's piercing cries. The sound of Lyudmila's boots as she dragged her son toward the cemetery exit was merely a backdrop for the words that burned like hot coals in his mind. Money, shelter, bastard, died. Each phrase was a blow to his memory of Anna, of their love, of the boy whose eyes reflected her pain. A rage rang in his ears, ancient and primitive, the same rage that had once driven him forward, helping him escape poverty. But now it was directed at the man who held his most precious possession in his hands. He didn't hesitate or make plans. His body, still strong despite everything he had been through, sprang into action with a fierce burst of energy. His expensive boots, which had just been stuck in the mud, now cut through the damp ground of the alley at incredible speed, chasing after the fleeing figures. "Stop!" His voice, accustomed to commanding crowds, rang out like a gunshot, causing Lyudmila to flinch and Misha to press himself against her. She froze at the rusty cast-iron gate, her swollen face contorted with a mixture of fear and defiance as Yuri, breathing heavily not from exhaustion but from rage, stood before them, his huge shadow covering them. "Where are you going, sir?" she snorted, trying to push Misha away as a protective shield. "Give him back. The child." Each word came out of Yuri's mouth with difficulty, quiet and strained, his fingers involuntarily clenching into tight fists. Lyudmila smiled contemptuously and said, "I've heard these fairy tales. First, the money, cash, right now. For all these years that my sister was fooling around hiding your child, for my efforts, for the nerves you ruined." Her voice, full of rage, echoed off the marble walls. Misha, pressed against the rusty patterns of the gate, tried to disappear into the shadows. An image flashed in Yuri's mind. Anya, a year ago, in the hospital, her delicate hand, like a feather, resting in his palm. "Yura, forgive me. For everything," she whispered, words that he had dismissed as the ravings of a sick woman. "There's nothing to forgive, sunshine," he replied, squeezing her fingers, unaware that she was asking forgiveness for their child, for her silence, for years of living in fear. "What money?" Yuri's voice sounded like ice. For hurting them? For stealing Ani's paintings when she was dying? Lyudmila paled, her gaze wavering. "That's not true. I was helping her," she exclaimed. "She was too proud to take your money." "Mom didn't want to upset you, Aunt Lyuda," whispered Misha, his voice barely audible, trembling. "She was afraid you'd kick me out." Lyudmila grabbed his arm sharply. "Shut up, you devil. Your mother gave up. Now I'm the boss." She spat almost at Yuri's feet. "Did you hear that, Sotnikov? I'm the mistress. Either pay up or take this freak away right now and get out of here, or I'll go to all the newspapers and tell them what a benefactor you are. You drove your wife into poverty and didn't even know your son." His words hit him like a blow to an open wound. Yuri didn't find a cemetery, only a modest apartment on the 5th floor without an elevator, just as Misha had said. Anya appeared before him pale and emaciated, a brush in her trembling hand, trying to paint something bright, while Lyudmila loudly demanded the last of it from her in the next room. A boy was hiding in the corner. Yuri was overcome not by anger, but by a cold, calculating rage. He moved forward. Lyudmila instinctively stepped back, hitting the door with her back. "How dare you?" His voice was heavier than any scream. "You dared to call me a bastard?" She dared to threaten him with shelter, dared to spit on the memory of my wife. Only now, when he was half a meter away from her, did his physical power, his dominance, his position, like an invisible aura, break through her self-control. A shadow of fear flashed in her eyes. Let go of his hand. He didn't shout, but every word hung in the air like heavy lead. Lyudmila stumbled, trying to keep her grip. "What are you going to do? Kill me in front of everyone?" She glanced at the empty cemetery. "You wouldn't do that, would you? I'll ruin your life." "My life?" Yuri smiled bitterly, as if her words were meaningless. His life had ended 3 days ago. His gaze fell not on Lyudmila, but on Misha. In his gray eyes, flooded with tears, he saw the same silent question that had been in Ani's eyes in her last moments. Why? At that moment, the last wall collapsed. "I won't kill you, Lyudmila," Yuri whispered, his voice quiet but so piercing that Lyudmila shuddered. "I'll do something worse to you. You wanted money? You'll only see it in photographs. Fame? You'll be known in every social services office, every police station. You wanted scandal?" He leaned closer, his gaze empty and piercing. "I'll cause such a scandal that your husband, that drunkard, will run away from you first. You'll be left alone, penniless, nameless. You'll live like a cockroach in a crack. And every minute you'll remember it was me." Lyudmila faded. Her lips trembled. Her grip on Misha's hand weakened. Noticing this, the boy quietly began to cry and moved away, pressing himself against Yuri's back, his little fingers digging into the fabric of his coat. Lyudmila froze, staring at the scene. A powerful man, like an impenetrable rock, carefully protecting a crying child. Her shamelessness instantly dissipated, leaving only animal fear. You have no right," she whispered, backing away. "No right." Yuri straightened up and covered her with his shadow again. "I am his father. I have the right to take him, my child." "My child." He took another step, not giving her a chance to leave. "Go, now, before I change my mind." His words sounded threatening, hinting at inevitable violence. Lyudmila glanced at Misha with such fury that the boy pressed himself even closer to Yuri. Instead of leaving, Lyudmila froze, her swollen face contorted not just with anger, but with something resembling triumphant revenge. "Mistress," she sneered, drawing out the words with poisonous irony, her small, fiercely shining eyes piercing Yuri. "Where were you, Yuri Olegovich, huh? When my sister was hiding in basements, pregnant with your child? When she gave birth alone in a cheap clinic, afraid that you wouldn't recognize her?" Each word was like a hammer blow to Yuri, causing him to shudder with internal agony. Misha fell silent behind him, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "She didn't trust you, sir," Lyudmila proclaimed, her voice carrying through the hall with such force that it echoed off the marble walls. "She didn't trust you. And do you know why? Because she knew what kind of company you were keeping back then." Yuri felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. Black spots swirled before his eyes, not from pain but from the stunning truth. Suddenly, a year of separation, a year of trials. His partner, Sergei Dorokov, his close friend, turned out to be a traitor, entangled in a web of criminal machinations involving kickbacks and fictitious companies. The investigation, threats, interrogations, where they tried to implicate him in the whole affair. Shadows lurked in dark alleys. Unmarked cars circled his office incessantly, and rumors of accidents involving those who dared to oppose Dorokhov spread throughout the city. He himself was on the brink, balancing between imprisonment and death. He tried with all his might to shield Anya from this grim reality, insisting that she go to her mother, far away from it all, while he dealt with this unpleasant situation. "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. This is just a temporary test. I'll sort everything out and then we'll—" He remembered her face at the train station, pale, with a glimmer of fear in her eyes that he didn't understand at the time, with a kind of doomed, submissive look. He took it as her caring for him. And she... Did she already know about the child? She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything at a time when he couldn't spare a thought for her, when he was fighting for his interests, defending his business and personal freedom from predators in expensive suits and outright malefactors. Lyudmila spat out Dorokhov's name as if it were poison. "Your golden partner." Anya accidentally overheard his words on the phone just before you, caring for her, sent her away from trouble. She heard threats, an angry voice, promises to take revenge on everyone dear to you. Yuri remembered that conversation. Dorokhov's voice drunk and full of hatred. "I'll destroy you, Yura, and everyone you love. I'll find them and show them what hell is. You'll be crawling." At the time, Yuri dismissed these words, considering them to be nothing more than the ravings of an embittered man. But Anya believed Lyudmila's words, and fear gripped her, not for her own life, but for the life of their unborn child. She was terrified that these creatures would find out about the baby. Lyudmila's voice trembled with panic. Saliva sprayed into the cold air. She was convinced that the child would be kidnapped, killed, just to hurt you. That's why she kept quiet, the stupid woman. She hid like a mole. And you, Lyudmila laughed contemptuously. You didn't even notice that she wasn't going to her mother's alone, that her belly was already noticeably rounded? You were too focused on saving yourself, you rich man. Memories flooded Yuri's mind, not of happy times, but of that terrible year of separation. His reflection in the mirror after the nighttime interrogation was pale and exhausted. Unknown phone calls, the feeling of being constantly watched, it all came back. And Anya, her rare short phone calls. "Everything's fine, Yura. Don't worry. Mom's healthy." There was an echo of fatigue in his heart, but he explained it away as her anxiety and boredom in her mother's provincial village. He could never have imagined that at that moment she was carrying their son under her heart, fearing that any meeting with him could betray them to Dorokhov's gang. That the birth was taking place in the semi-darkness of a district hospital, without him, with only his sister's hand clenched in hers, and his mother dying of cancer. That their child, his own offspring, was entering life as a secret, as a potential target for enemies. "Let him go." Yuri exhaled, but his voice sounded weak and listless, as if it were not an order but a plea, pierced with despair and shock. "No!" Lyudmila grabbed Misha, hugging him tightly, and he cried out. "You understand now, don't you? You see what kind of life you've created for her? She died of the fear you instilled in her, of the poverty you plunged her into with your salvation." His words pierced his heart like a knife. Yuri staggered, and the memory of Anya in the hospital flashed before his eyes, her frightened gaze, which he had then explained away as illness. He was driven by fears deeper and older than Lyudmila's. Fear for his son, left with an unreliable sister. Fear that the truth would blossom like a flower and its delicate petals would be torn apart. Fear of him, of his anger, of his world, which could destroy their child before he was even born. He's my son," Yuri whispered, his gaze falling on the frightened face of Misha, who was clinging to Lyudmila. "It's your shame," Lyudmila hissed. "It's your fault. And you won't see him. He's my protection, my revenge. You'll pay for everything, Sotnikov, for Anka's ruined life. I've spent my whole life in disgust next to her." She began to drag Misha toward the gate. "Pay up or he'll disappear to a place where even your money can't reach him," Lyudmila declared triumphantly, pulling Misha by the arm toward the exit. Yuri felt his world sway. A sharp, unbearable pain gripped his chest, causing him to freeze and catch his breath. He clutched his heart, his face turning pale, large beads of sweat covering his forehead. Unsteady, he almost collapsed onto the damp ground, grabbing the icy edge of Anna's gravestone. The ringing in his ears and the agonizing nausea mixed with icy fear, not for himself but for the boy who was being led away, forced him to find the tiny emergency call button on his coat pocket. He pressed it with all his strength, once, twice, again even harder. Immediately, breaking the deathly silence, there was the sharp sound of heavy boots on the wet path. Two men appeared from around the bend in the alley, breaking into a run. Igor, Yuri's personal driver, a strong and tough former Special Forces soldier, and Nikolai, the head of security, with his usual serious expression. They instantly understood what had happened. Their boss, bent over the grave, was pale as death, and next to him was a woman holding a crying child by the hand. "Boss!" Igor was there in an instant, grabbing Yuri by the armpits. The sudden appearance of these people paralyzed Lyudmila, her joy replaced by a sharp animal fear. "Take the child!" Yuri gasped, barely moving his white lips, and pointed to Misha with a trembling hand. "Take him to the car! Nikolai, stay with me!" Nikolai, without asking any questions, took 2 long steps and stood in front of Lyudmila, his silent, threatening presence clearer than any scream. He simply held out his hand to Misha. "Come here, boy." His voice was calm, but left no room for doubt. Lyudmila, overcome with despair like a trapped animal, released her clenched fingers. Misha, sobbing, rushed to Nikolai, burying his face in his thick coat. Igor, gently but quickly, as the situation demanded, led the boy to the car, leaving Yuri and Nikolai alone with Lyudmila. Yuri, still leaning against the gravestone, took a small box out of his jacket's inside pocket with a trembling hand. He took a pill out of it, put it under his tongue, and took a deep, painful breath, followed by a heavy exhalation. His eyes, full of agonizing pain and exhaustion, but now pierced with icy determination, met Lyudmila's. Now, his voice was barely audible, hoarse, but every word sounded like a blow to her heart. "Let's talk without unnecessary words. Forget everything. Everything you said. All the threats. To my child." He paused briefly to allow the pill to take effect, to allow his words to reach Lyudmila's consciousness. She looked at him with disgust, but now her eyes flashed with fear and awe for these people, for his unexpected strength to act despite the pain. "You are my wife's sister," Yuri said, his breathing even, but a shadow still lingering in his eyes. "And you were with her until the very end." He fell silent, and in that silence, in his suddenly softened, almost normal tone, Lyudmila saw not weakness, but a threat hidden behind a mask of sympathy. Something awakened in her not only rage, but also another, no less vivid memory. Suddenly, Anya came to mind, pale, frightened, knocking on the door on that cold autumn day, her hands trembling as she clutched her barely noticeable round belly. "Lyuda, help! I'm scared. He's in danger. Those people, they might find out. They might hurt the baby." Lyuda clearly saw genuine primal terror in her sister's eyes. She remembered how she had taken her into her cramped Khrushchev-era apartment with a heavy heart, angry at this naive fool and her master, but unable to refuse. Memories of the night of the birth came flooding back, Anya screaming not from physical pain, but from terror. "Don't call him, Lyuda. It's dangerous. They can trace the call. They'll find out." She remembered how she squeezed her hand tightly in the dirty delivery room, how she cursed the medical staff, how she then dragged her to work to get formula and diapers for her nephew, whom she eventually began to hate for this burden. Something mysterious flashed across her swollen face, not like remorse, but more like an echo of a long-ago connection, clouded by time, envy, and poverty. Yuri noticed the shadow, and to my surprise decided to use it. "I appreciate such actions," he said quietly, looking her in the eyes, the anger gone from his voice, leaving only weary heaviness and something resembling a confession. "You were there when I failed." The words "failed" sounded like a blow, but they contained all the bitterness of realization. "Forget the threats, forget your words, but my son is coming with me, now." He took a step forward, no longer leaning on Nikolai, but Nikolai still remained his shadow, a silent but reliable companion. "Your fate is sealed, but not as a reward, rather as a token of gratitude to my wife's sister, for that period, for the help she gave us then." In her eyes, he could see the struggle, greed, fear, and the last sparks of humanity that had surfaced thanks to his words. "The choice is yours, Lyudmila. The path of scandal and war, where you are doomed to defeat." He barely nodded toward Nikolai's imposing figure. "Or the path of reason. And a life with everything you need, far away from us." Lyudmila clenched and unclenched her fists. Her breathing was ragged. Her gaze darted back and forth between the spot where Misha and Igor had disappeared and Anna's grave, which she had just spat on. Then she looked at Yuri, who, despite the sickly look on his face and the barely noticeable shadow of pain at his lips, still radiated confidence. Her shoulders slumped, not out of humility, but out of the realization of temporary defeat. "Secure," she whispered, not looking at him. How secure? Yuri almost imperceptibly touched the radio on Nikolai's belt. My lawyer will bring the documents. You sign, you get paid, and you disappear forever. He turned and headed for the car, for his son. Every movement was saturated with pain, but he kept going. Nikolai did not leave Lyudmila's side, his gaze as hard as stone, clearly indicating that the conversation was over. Lyudmila stood at her sister's grave, her thoughts filled with hatred and the lure of money. In the figure of the departing Yuri, she did not see a defeated enemy, but a new, more formidable master of her destiny. A damp wind rustled the drooping wreaths, and her own words, spoken so frankly, now hung in the air like an eternal sentence. Yuri sank heavily into the soft leather seat of the limousine. His fingers were still trembling restlessly, and the pain in his heart, softened by the pill, gave way to numb weakness and a piercing emptiness. The closing door deprived him of the damp cemetery air and Lyudmila, who remained with Nikolai and the lawyer. In the silence of the salon, dominated by the scents of expensive wood and leather, there was something more, an irresistible fear. Misha, like a frightened animal, clung to the far corner of the huge seat, his thin shoulders tense, his huge gray eyes like a reflection of Yuri's childish eyes, darting around the luxury of the interior, not daring to look up at his father. Only the steady hum of the engine and the boy's ragged breathing broke the silence. Every bump in the road that the giant machine overcame seemed to bring back fragments of Misha's terrible past, causing him to curl up even tighter. He remembered his Aunt Lyuda's cramped two-room apartment on the 5th floor where the elevator often broke down, the smell of cabbage, cheap sausage, and something abandoned. And then he remembered the rare moments when Aunt Lyuda, sober and kind, would come home from the market with a bag of pillow-shaped candies or a piece of pie. She would sit down on the worn-out sofa, saturated with the smell of sweat and cigarettes, and say in a hoarse voice, "Come on, Misha, hold on, just like your mother did. She endured everything for you, poor thing." At that moment, Misha clung to that tiny spark of warmth, trying to be invisible and useful, doing everything he could not to be a burden, washing dishes, going to the store for bread and inexpensive fish for Uncle Vitya. He remembered a time when Aunt Lyuda, after a couple of shots, suddenly burst into tears, hugged him, smelling of alcohol, and whispered, "My Anka, my little sister, she was so bright, and your father ruined her, that vile bastard." Asterisk. That was the first time he heard that word, father. It sounded like a curse, a designation for something terrible and distant. Most often, Aunt Lyuda came to mind in anger. Her screams, echoing throughout the apartment, were inevitable when she couldn't find her cigarettes, or when Uncle Vitya showed up drunk and irritable. "You parasite! You live off me, just like your mother!" "None of you let me live." Her piercing voice deafened him, forcing him to hide under the table or in the narrow space between the wardrobe and the wall. He was tormented by memories of her face, flushed with rage and vodka, when she discovered that he had eaten the last piece of cheese. "You take everything for yourself, and I work for you, you miserable brat. Do you remember your damned mother? She died and left you in my care." He remembered how his insides clenched, how tears stung his eyes, but he was afraid to cry. It would only make her angrier. He remembered how she had snatched the drawings his mother had made for him, which he had carefully kept under his mattress. "They're mine now. I'll drink a bottle for them. Your mother owes me for all this time." And she would leave, leaving him in the semi-darkness of the apartment, enveloped in a feeling of helplessness and fear. His most vivid and painful memories were connected with his mother. She always came home from the market exhausted, but she always found the strength to smile and hug him. "How's my brave boy? Did you hold your ground?" Her voice was gentle and tender, like a soothing balm. The small room was filled with her paintings, not sad, but imbued with a strange light shining through the cracks in the walls of the houses depicted. "Look, Mish, even in the darkest corner there is a glimmer. You just have to learn to notice it." He sat down next to her, and together they admired the flickering cracks. She shared stories about distant lands, the endless sea, and sparkling stars, promising that one day they would see it all with their own eyes. "Dad, he's busy with important things, building magnificent houses. But he's a good man, Misha. He doesn't blame us. I kept quiet, to protect you from pain." There was such deep sadness and anxiety in her eyes that Misha asked no more questions, just held her tighter, feeling her body wasting away with each passing day. I remembered her cough, which she tried to hide by wrapping herself in a pillow so as not to disturb him. I remembered the hospital, the smell of medicine and hopelessness. Her hand, weightless, lay in his palm. "Mishenka, my dear, be strong. Like Daddy, she whispered in her last days, her eyes huge on her pale face filled with such tender love and longing that his heart ached. You'll find him when you grow up. Tell him that I love you. He nodded, squeezed her hand, vowing never to forget the pain, the trauma inflicted on their lives by their destructive father. But then she was gone. All that remained was Aunt Liuda with her anger, Uncle Vitya with his wine, and an eternal all-consuming fear. The limousine stopped smoothly and silently. Misha shuddered as if from a nightmare. Outside the window stood a cast-iron gate, and in front of it stretched a long gravel road leading to a stately house resembling a palace. An icy ring of fear tightened around the boy's chest again. This was his father's world, the world his mother had tried so desperately to hide him from. Yuri looked at the boy and sighed heavily. He saw in his eyes the same horror that a prisoner feels when looking at the impenetrable walls of a prison. Asterisk, his homeland. Yuri cautiously extended his hand, not touching the boy, just exposing his palm, a sign of peace, a gesture of apology that came with difficulty. Here, we're home, Misha. His voice sounded strange and uncertain in the silence. The boy, as if in a trance, shifted his gaze from the majestic house to this powerful masculine hand. His eyes still burned with fear, pain from memories and distrust, but something stirred inside him, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps a tiny spark of faith, ignited by his mother's words about his kind father. He did not take the outstretched hand, but he did not move away either. He just sat there, staring at the stranger, at this father he did not know, frozen between the anxiety of the past and the anticipation of the future, in the luxurious cage of a limousine, on the border of a strange, boundless world. Yuri withdrew his hand. The driver's door swung open, letting in a stream of cool air and a new dose of the unknown. His memory returned to Aunt Liuda's cramped two-room apartment on the 5th floor where the elevator was constantly out of order. The smell was familiar and repulsive. Cabbage, cheap sausage, and something rotten. Rare moments floated into his memory when Aunt Liuda was sober and came home from the market with a bag of pillow-shaped candies or a piece of pie. She would sit down on the worn-out sofa saturated with the smell of sweat and tobacco and say in a hoarse voice, "Well, Misha, hang in there just like your mother did. She, poor thing, endured everything for you." Misha clung to this tiny spark of warmth, trying to be inconspicuous and useful, doing everything he could not to be a burden. He washed the dishes, went to the store for bread and cheap alcohol for Uncle Vitya. He remembered a time when Aunt Liuda, after a couple of shots, suddenly burst into tears, hugged him, smelling of alcohol, and whispered, "My Anka, my little sister. She was so bright. And your father ruined her, that bastard." It was then that he heard the word father for the first time. It sounded like an insult, like a designation for something terrible and alien. Most often, his memory was filled with images of his evil Aunt Liuda. Her angry screams, which echoed throughout the apartment, occurred when she couldn't find her cigarettes, or when Uncle Vitya came home drunk and furious. "You parasite! You're a burden! Just like your mother, you're all ruining my life." Her piercing voice, full of hatred and drunken rage, made him hide under the table or in the narrowest corner between the wall and the wardrobe. He glanced at her face, red with rage and vodka, when she discovered that he had eaten the last piece of cheese. "You ate it all yourself, and I work for you, you miserable freak! Remember your damn mother? She died and left you to me." He felt his insides tighten, tears stinging his eyes, but he didn't dare cry. That would only provoke her into new outbursts of rage. He remembered how she had snatched his mother's drawings from his hands, which he had carefully kept hidden under his mattress. "Now they're mine. I'll get something for them. Your mother owes me for all these years." And she would leave, leaving him in the semi-darkness of the apartment, enveloped in a feeling of helplessness and fear. His brightest, most painful memories were tied to his mother. Her return from the market, always exhausted, but always greeting him with a smile and a warm hug. "My little soldier, did you hold the fort?" Her voice was gentle and soothing, like medicine. The small room was filled with her paintings, not gloomy, but filled with a strange light shining through the cracks in the walls of the houses painted on them. "See, Mish, even in the dreariest place there is light. You just have to know how to see it." She sat him down next to her and they watched the flickering cracks in silence. Her voice, like a whisper, told of distant lands, of the endless sea and shining stars, promising that one day all these wonders would become their reality. "Dad, he's immersed in his important work building huge houses, but he's kind, Misha. He just doesn't understand us. I kept quiet, to protect you from pain." There was such despair and fear in her eyes that Misha asked no more questions, only clinging tighter to her, feeling her body wasting away with each passing day. I remembered her cough, which she tried to hide by pressing herself against the pillow so as not to disturb him. Memories of the hospital came flooding back, with its smell of medicine and heavy atmosphere of despair. Her fragile hand lay in his palm. "Mishenka, my dear, be strong, like Daddy," she whispered in her last days, her huge eyes, reflecting all her pain and weakness, looking at him with such tenderness and sadness that his heart broke. "You'll find him. When you grow up, tell him that I love you." In response, he nodded, squeezing her hand, vowing never to let the pain that their father had inflicted on them, destroying their world, happen again. But then she disappeared. All that remained was Aunt Liuda with her anger, Uncle Vitya with his constant drinking and eternal fear. Yuri led Misha through the spacious hall of the mansion, where high vaulted ceilings and shiny marble floors amplified their every step, creating a feeling of boundless emptiness. The boy walked silently, his eyes fixed on the floor, clutching his worn jacket tightly in his fingers. "This is your room," said Yuri, opening the door to a large but completely empty guest room filled with expensive but lifeless furniture. Misha stopped in the doorway, his gaze sweeping across the sterile room, past the floor-to-ceiling window, beyond which lay a well-tended but unfamiliar garden that seemed to belong to no one. Mom would have drawn the sun on these walls," he whispered barely audibly, and Yuri, as if struck by lightning, felt his heart sink. In the first few hours, there was an oppressive silence. Misha, curled up on the edge of the huge bed, did not touch the food that the housekeeper had brought him with concern. Yuri, standing by the window, felt like a helpless giant in a shiny but empty castle. He noticed how the boy flinched at every sharp sound, how his body tensed at the slightest noise in the house, as if reflecting the life Lyudmila had led. Aunt Liuda screamed in the kitchen, smashing dishes. "Damn the master! He lives like a king, while we and his offspring are drowning in a swamp." The boy hid behind the sofa, trying not to breathe. The air was filled with the smell of alcohol and rotten potatoes. Suddenly she enters the room, her eyes dull. "Well, where's the money your mother hid under the pillow?" She throws the pillows around. Her mother's old scarf falls to the floor. He remains silent, clenching his fists. A hard blow to the back. "Not talking? Just like your mother, a whore. I'll kill you both." And then suddenly, there was a rare pause. Sober, with a bag of bread rolls in her hands, she sat down next to him, smelling of cheap soap. "Eat. Don't waste away here, or you'll have to be buried at our expense." His voice was harsh, but his movements as he broke off a piece of bread revealed a tremor. "Anka, you idiot. You could have had a normal life. All because of you." He took the loaf without looking at her. A bitter crumb stuck in his throat, reminding him of the pain. My mother expressed it most vividly. The room is bathed in warm evening sunlight. My mother stands at the easel, her slender brush painting a stroke. A blue flower is born on the canvas, breaking through a crack in the concrete. "Look, Misha," she says. "Even in the most inconspicuous place, beauty lives." She turns around, her smile gentle, but her eyes show fatigue, bruises under them. He presses himself against her, feeling the fragility of her bones under her thin clothes. "Mom, what about Dad? When will he come back?" Her smile disappears, her eyes fill with anxiety like a frightened bird. "Dad, he's far away, sweetheart. He's protecting us from bad people. That's why we have to be quiet, like mice, so we don't distract him." She gently strokes his hair, her hand light, almost imperceptible. "He is strong, and you will be just as strong. You are my strong boy, aren't you?" He nods, not understanding, but his eyes show trust in every word she says. Then night falls. From her side, behind the thin wall, comes a muffled cough, the sound of a glass falling, a quiet moan. He lies still, holding his breath, listening to Aunt Liuda's indignant voice. "I put up with you long enough, you fool. Now pay for your own treatment." In the morning, Misha doesn't show up for breakfast. Yuri, overcome with a sense of foreboding, enters the room. The boy was lying in bed, hunched over, his face flushed unnaturally, contrasting with the bluish tint under his eyes. "Misha?" Yuri said quietly. He touched the boy's forehead. His skin was burning. Misha opened his eyes, dull from the high fever. "My head hurts," he whispered, and began to cough, a dry, hoarse cough that seemed to shake his entire frail body. Something cold and sticky tightened in Yuri's chest. It wasn't just fear. It was both familiar and terrifying. "Call a doctor!" Quickly! The order rang out throughout the house with desperate force. While waiting for the doctor, Yuri sat next to his son, pressing a cold towel to his forehead. Each cough felt like a stab to his nerves. Misha, in a semi-conscious state, muttered incoherent phrases. "Don't touch me, Aunt Liuda. I cleaned it up. Mom, where are you? Dad, protect me from the bad guys." In the hospital ward, memories took him back to his past, 25 years ago. A young man who had escaped from a remote village, a hungry student who had to sleep 4 hours a day on a hard bed in a shabby dormitory. He stubbornly pursued his goal, gritting his teeth, honing his knowledge and fighting his way out of poverty, working as a loader at night after lectures and carefully saving every penny to finally free himself from the poor life that had weighed on him and his family since childhood. The weight of responsibility had been a heavy burden on him even then. He had to support his parents, help his younger sister, and prove his worth to those around him. He built his empire tirelessly, step by step, year after year, sparing neither himself nor others. He was called relentless, principled, and impartial. At the moment when his strength was almost exhausted, when it seemed that he was about to succumb to the pressure of problems with his first important contract, he went into a modest cafe near the construction site to drink coffee. And there, sitting by the window with a book, he saw her, Anya. A ray of sunlight played in her chestnut hair, and he froze, struck by her beauty. She looked up, and in the depths of her eyes he saw neither fear nor coldness, only sincere interest and a certain mysterious, quiet power. Accustomed to self-confidence, he felt confused for the first time in his life, so much so that he spilled coffee on his only good suit. Her clear, good-natured laughter rang out as she handed him a paper napkin. "Has your day been rough since this morning?" Her voice was soft and soothing. He nodded, feeling awkward. "You could say that," he muttered. "You know, sometimes coffee on a suit is like a sign," he added, embarrassed. She smiled again. "A sign of what?" he asked, interest slipping into his voice. "A sign that it's time to stop. Take a breath," she replied simply. And they began to talk. She was an artist. Her soul was free and bright, and she found beauty in simple things. In the unevenness of the asphalt, in the shapes of the clouds, in the weary faces of working people. She was not repelled by his severity, his gloom. With tenderness, but with persistence, she entered his life like the spring sun breaking through the dust on a dirty window. She taught him to look at the world in a new way, revealing to him not only graphs and figures, but also the beauty of the sunset over the city, the joy of children, and the smell of freshly baked bread, and how keenly her absence, her warmth, and her love are felt now. Senior physician Tarasov, known for his extensive experience, arrived quickly. The examination was long and alarming. Yuri stood huddled by the window, clenching his fists, watching the doctor examine the boy's lungs. The doctor's face grew darker and darker. "Yuri Olegovich," Tarasov finally said, putting down his stethoscope. His voice was heavy and tense. "Pneumonia, bilateral, and coughing, high fever, general exhaustion. It's all very similar to the onset of Anna Sergeyevna's illness. It looks like," he added, not saying aloud, but with the icy, inevitable word cancer hanging palpably in the air. Yuri gripped the back of his chair tightly. "Anya, Misha, could it be? It couldn't be that history would repeat itself with such ruthlessness. He must be hospitalized immediately, given a full examination, and it had to be done right now." In the ward where Misha, hooked up to IVs and medical equipment, slept peacefully under the influence of medication, Yuri looked through the contents of Anya's old suitcase, which had been brought from their former apartment. He was desperate to find any clue, a photograph, a note, anything that might shed light on the past. His fingers stumbled upon a hard cover, a small album bound in cloth, Anya's diary. The pages were yellowed with age. Yuri opened it at random, and his gaze was drawn to an entry made in the year they were separated, when he was embroiled in a fierce struggle with Dorokov. "Today I learned the truth. The test confirmed my fears. 2 stripes. Unbelievable. Terrifying. Yura. He's in such a dangerous situation, so far away from me. I can hear the desperation in his voice on the phone, as if he were a hunted animal. If they find out about the child, Dorokov, he'll stop at nothing." He threatened Yura. "I'll get you through what you love most. The child will become his target. I can't put him in danger. I can't tell Yura now. He might react too strongly, do something rash. Only Liuda. She's the only one I can trust. She's mean, but she's still my sister. I hope—" Tears flooded the text. Ink ran down the paper. Yuri closed his eyes, his thoughts filled with fear, loneliness, and the incredible power of silence that she always managed to maintain. He placed his hand on his son's hot forehead, who was deep in sleep. I'm sorry, he whispered, unable to determine to whom the words were addressed, to Anna, Misha, or himself. 2 days later, the crisis receded. It turned out that the pneumonia, although severe, was ordinary. Cancer was ruled out. Misha, pale but with a penetrating gaze, sat on the bed studying the tablet Yuri had given him. Yuri, sitting next to him, told him about the vastness of the sea and the stars that Anya had mentioned. For the first time in a long time, the boy's eyes flashed with curiosity mixed with caution, rather than fear. A smile barely touched Misha's lips. At that moment, the door to the ward swung open silently. Nikolai entered, his usually stern face tense. Without a word, he handed Yuri a large envelope. From Lyudmila Sergeyevna, she asked her husband to give it to you. And she added, "You'll probably find something interesting in it." A sense of foreboding settled in Yuri's chest. He opened the envelope and his gaze fell on medical documents, old yellowed papers. An extract from a women's clinic. Name, Anna Sotnikova. Diagnosis made on first visit, cystic fibrosis. Yuri froze when he learned about the genetic nature of this disease and the high risk of passing it on to his child. He understood what this meant. A serious, incurable disease that affects the lungs, pancreas, the very thing that had taken Anna away. And Misha, could he be a carrier of this disease? Or was he already sick? He involuntarily squeezed his son's hand as if trying to protect him from harm. Looking at him fearfully, Misha sensed something disturbing in his expression. But that wasn't the end of it. At the bottom of the envelope was another sheet of paper, the results of a DNA test. But not Yuri's and Misha's. It was a comparative analysis. Lyudmila Sergeyevna Ivanova, aunt, and Mikhail Yuryevich Sotnikov, nephew. Yuri read the lines full of dry, emotionless text, and his world fell apart completely. The number in the column, probability of maternal relationship, was strikingly accurate and therefore even more terrifying. 0%. The conclusion drew particular attention to the phrase highlighted in bold, "The persons tested are not biological relatives on the maternal side." Yuri froze, staring at Misha's peaceful sleeping face, then at the document in his hands. His mind couldn't accept this information, not related on his mother's side, but Lyudmila and Anya were real sisters. If Misha wasn't related to Lyudmila by blood, then he wasn't Anya's son? The envelope slipped from his weakening fingers. The deafening noise in the hospital blocked out all other sounds. He saw Nikolai trying to say something, saw Misha looking at him anxiously, but his mind was consumed by the icy whisper of his own questions. Who am I? Who am I? And where is my child? The last thing that flashed through his mind before darkness engulfed him was Lyudmila's snake-like, triumphant voice, which floated back into his memory. "This isn't the end, Sotnikov. I'll find you yet." And she did, and she struck him right in the heart. Yuri came to in a familiar hospital ward. Apiaka, sharp and intrusive, pinched his nostrils, and Dr. Tarasov leaned over him, his face expressionless. "Are you okay, Yuri Olegovich? You had vasospasm caused by severe stress." The doctor's voice seemed to come from far away. Yuri, ignoring the fact that his head was spinning and his body was weak, sat up abruptly. His gaze fell on Misha, who was sitting on his bed, pale and frightened, clutching the tablet tightly in his hands. His eyes showed a mixture of silent questioning and the dawning horror of despair. On the bedside table lay an envelope with documents radiating an invisible threat like a poisonous snake. "Get out!" Yuri's voice was hoarse, but his words left no room for doubt. Tarasov and the nurse silently backed away. Nikolai stood by the wall, his eyes fixed on Yuri, his face uncompromising, but deep in his eyes there was unbearable tension. Yuri took the envelope and read the murderous lines again. 0.00% are not biological relatives. His gaze fell on Misha, who cowered like a frightened animal. Yuri, struggling to squeeze out each word as if his throat were clogged with gravel, asked, "Nikolai, where is Lyudmila?" "She's gone." After I gave the envelope to her husband. He was completely drunk, mumbling something about justice and retribution. Her exact destination is unknown. "Find her immediately!" The order was given with the same cold clarity as a sword blade. Nikolai nodded, taking out his phone. Yuri stood up, walked to the window, turning his back to Misha. Below lay the city, his domain. At that moment, it resembled a card game on the edge of an abyss. Fragments flashed through his mind like sharp spikes. In her last days, Anna had held his hand, her eyes filled not only with pain but also with some kind of agonizing hidden truth. "Yura, forgive me. For everything. For Misha." At that moment, it became clear to him that she was asking for forgiveness for hiding their son. But was she really asking for forgiveness for the deception? At the cemetery, Lyudmila whispers, her words laced with venom. She died of the fear you instilled in her, of hopelessness or perhaps of despair, realizing that she had lost her own child. Or of agonizing guilt for the substitution she had committed. Misha. Yuri can feel his thin shoulder under his hand, his gaze full of trust, albeit mixed with fear, fixed on the limousine window. His eyes are like his mother's. But who is their true owner? You, Misha whispered in a hoarse, painful voice, making Yuri turn around. The boy looked at him, tears running down his cheeks, but he held back his sobs. You aren't my dad anymore? The question pierced the silence like a sharp knife. In Misha's eyes, Yuri saw not only childish terror, but also the wisdom of an adult who understood the depth of betrayal. Betrayal by Lyudmila, by Ani, or was it simply betrayal by life itself? I don't know, Misha, Yuri admitted, feeling his world crumble. But you're here, and you're sick, he faltered, unable to continue. Now I can't just push you away like a useless thing. He never said it out loud. The door opened and Nikolai entered, his face like a stormy sky. He was holding a tape recorder in his hands. They found it in her husband's apartment. Her husband couldn't take the pressure and revealed Lyudmila's hiding place. This is Anna Sergeyevna's last message, recorded in secret. Nikolai handed Yuri a compact digital voice recorder. And now, Lyudmila has contacted us, using an anonymous number. She asked us to listen to the recording until the end and warned that this was only the beginning of the game. Yuri pressed the play button with a trembling hand. Silence hung in the ward, interrupted only by the humming of the machines and Misha's wheezing. A faint, barely audible voice came from the speakers, the one that had been heard only in the last few days. Yura, if you can hear me. I can't keep quiet anymore. I'm sorry for everything. For Misha, he's not yours. Her voice broke treacherously, choking with tears. Not ours, not our son. Our boy was stolen, back then, in the maternity ward. In the recording, Ani's voice is pierced with indescribable, almost monstrous pain. Lyuda told me he died. On the third day, he never showed up. Cystic fibrosis manifested itself immediately. I didn't see him. I only heard him crying, barely audible. Then there was silence. Lyuda brought another baby, left in the hallway. And she said, here's your son. Forget him. Otherwise, you'll go crazy. I really did go crazy. Yura, I took him as my own, to survive, to have something to hold on to. I loved him, as if he were mine, but our little one, I can feel him, somewhere. He's still alive. I have to stay alive. The recording was interrupted by a burst of bitter crying. An ominous silence hung in the ward. Misha froze like a statue, his eyes huge and full of horror, reflecting the terrible truth. He was a substitute child, a child taken to fill the void of someone else's tragedy. Yuri felt his world crumble completely, like ashes in the wind. His son, his real son. Was he dead? Or was he alive? And did Lyudmila know about this? A beep sounded from the speaker of the voice recorder. A new message had been received by the built-in memory. The next segment automatically started playing. The voice no longer belonged to Anna. It sounded cold, cynical, and triumphant. It was Lyudmila's voice. Well, Yuri Olegovich, did you listen? Your Anya, it turns out, is not just naive, but completely out of her mind. She believed that her baby was dead, but he survived. Your offspring is strong. He has cystic fibrosis, yes, but not the kind that is immediately fatal. They found him a home. Where? Think about it, rich man, for a hefty sum, of course. And this one? Her voice is filled with contempt. I left for you as a souvenir and for your amusement, because you know who took your son, who I sold him to. He's been waiting impatiently for you all these years. After being released last week, he must have guessed where you were. Seryozhenka Dorokov sends his regards, and he longs to meet his student. Or do you think his threats to Anka to get what was most precious to her were just empty words? He has everything planned, and now he has your most precious possession in his hands, your real son, alive, and I know where he is. Player Sotnikov, the game is just beginning. Choose. Take your illegitimate son and disappear. Or try to win back your own flesh and blood. The price will be... Oh, what the price will be. There was a short, sharp beep on the recording. The line went dead. Yuri squeezed the tape recorder so hard that the plastic creaked. Blood spots flashed before his eyes. Dorokov, a former friend turned enemy whose criminal activities Yuri had exposed, sending him to prison. A maniac, a sadist for whom revenge was the highest value. And he had his son, his real, suffering but living son, And next to him was Misha, a child entangled in a monstrous web, looking at him with eyes full of boundless, hopeless devotion and horror. "Father?" A whisper escaped the boy's lips like a last glimmer of hope which Yuri was about to destroy forever. Nikolai instantly straightened up, his radio on his belt creaking as if sensing the importance of the moment. He put it to his ear, his face instantly turning into a mask of steel. "Boss, outer perimeter. 2 suspicious individuals. 1 identified Sviridov. He has a companion who matches Dorokov's description. They are carrying a boy who is tied up and are heading toward the main entrance of the hospital. They demand your presence." Nikolai's gaze fell on the pale Misha, and the words coming from the radio sounded like a blow. "And they say they brought a present for Daddy. A real one." Yuri's eyes burned with the hellish fire of revenge consumed by madness. Dorokov didn't want to waste a minute and brought the gift himself, placing it right on the threshold. Now, Yuri Sotnikov had no choice but to go to war. A war to save his sons, to save both their lives. The last loud thump of his heart preceded eternal silence. The word real hung in the sterile space of the ward like a piercing blow, wounding Misha to the depths of his soul. Yuri watched as the last glimmers of hope faded from his gray eyes, as his small body shrank, as if ready to dissolve into nothingness. Time seemed to freeze, breaking into distinct, crystal-clear moments. Nikolai's hoarse voice on the radio, the flickering screens by Misha's bed, the reflection of his own face in the window, distorted by the unbearable weight of a decision that should never have been made. There was no alternative, never. Instead of the door where Dorokov was waiting with his gift, he headed toward Misha. One step, full of determination. He knelt down by the bed, his powerful arms gently embracing the boy's fragile shoulders, causing him to flinch and open his eyes wide, filled with tears and horror. Yuri said, "You are my son," not with a hint of an authoritative command, but with the force of an oath carved in solid rock. His voice was loud and clear so that everyone could hear. Misha, Nikolai, and whoever was hiding behind the door. "My son, here, at this moment, and always. It doesn't matter if we're related by blood. You are Misha Sotnikov, and I am your father. No one can take you away from me. No one." In the eyes of the boy waiting for the next blow, Yuri noticed something that faltered. Not joy, not faith, but a barely noticeable crack in the wall of despair. Yuri raised his eyes, and the icy fire in them met Nikolai's gaze. Nikolai. Citadel Protocol. Absolute isolation of this room. No entry or exit permitted. Reinforce security. Eliminate any threat. No questions asked. There was no room in his tone for sympathy for his former comrade, only cold determination to protect the present. Nikolai nodded and gave brief instructions over the radio. Behind the door, there were quick, confident footsteps and the sound of metal. "But what about the boy?" whispered Misha, clutching Yuri's robe sleeve with his tense fingers. "He's not to blame either, Misha." Yuri stood up, shielding the boy with his body as if it were a shield. "And if he's there, we'll help him. There's room for both of them. I promise." Yuri turned toward the door. "Let only Dorokov in. And the boy. Detain the rest." The door swung open and Sergei Dorokov appeared in the doorway. The years in prison had erased all traces of his former neatness, leaving only an embittered, disfigured face and eyes shining with insane triumph. He roughly pushed forward a young man of about 18, thin, pale, with features that seemed horribly familiar to Yuri. He recognized himself at 20 in them, the eyes, the shape of the chin, even the line of the eyebrows. Cystic fibrosis had left its mark. Blue circles under his eyes, exhaustion, but he still stood there, holding his head high, staring at Yuri with a look full of defiance and silent questions. His hands were tied behind his back. "Well, Yura?" Dorokov laughed hoarsely, his voice sliding over the nerves. "Take your gift, your own flesh and blood. His name is Artem, by the way. Handsome, isn't he? Just like you. Well, or like his mother." He pushed the boy forward. "Hello, Dad, the one who threw us in the trash." Artem was silent. His lips trembled, but Yuri could see the depth of his suffering in his eyes. Pain, anger, confusion. Yuri's heart ached with sympathy, but he didn't move, continuing to stand in front of Misha like an impenetrable shield. "Sergei," Yuri's voice was quiet, but every word was as sharp as a blade. "You got what you deserved for your crimes, not for my imaginary sins. Let the boy go, now, and leave while you still can." Yuri noticed Nikolai and 2 other guards standing in the way of the exit like ghosts. Dorokov snorted, rolling his eyes. "Is that it? Leave? No, Yura, that's not why I came here." He quickly grabbed his gun, aiming it not at Yuri but at Artem. Make a choice, old man. Your protege, he nodded contemptuously toward Misha, or your own flesh and blood? Who will you choose? Decide. Hurry up. My patience is running out. Everything froze. Artem held the gun in his hands. Misha, behind him, was breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest with excitement. Dorokov's eyes were wild with a mad gleam and a thirst for revenge. This was Lyudmila's game. She wanted to break him, to force him to make an unbearable choice between his sons, to make him experience the same hellish pain that Anya had experienced, the same pain that he himself had experienced. Yuri slowly raised his hands, showing his defenselessness. His gaze shifted from Artem's pale but proud face to Misha's frightened but trusting face, trusting him, his father. I'm not choosing, Sergei, Yuri said calmly. I'll take both of them. After all, they are both my sons. He took a step forward, but not toward Dorokov, instead standing between him and the boys as if protecting them with his body. My shot at you is the beginning of the siege. You're trapped. Your men are already in handcuffs. Surrender your weapons. Dorokov froze, his mad eyes darting around the room, to the doors, to the windows. Through the frosted glass of the ward, he could make out the silhouettes of armed men, their guns covered by shelters in the corridor, aimed at him. A shadow of doubt flashed through his heart. You're lying, he growled, but the words came out as a wheeze. His hand with the pistol trembled. At that moment, Nikolai, like a panther, lunged not at Dorokov, but to the side. His powerful punch to Dorokov's temple struck with such precision and force that the pistol flew out of his weakened hands and bounced across the floor. Dorokov fell as if someone had tripped him. A moment later, he was immobilized and neutralized. Artem, freed from the guard, faltered but was immediately supported. Yuri paid no attention to his defeated enemy. He turned to Misha, who was sitting on the bed, trembling, his eyes wide open. Artem, leaning against the guard, looked at Yuri, his gaze full of contradictions, shock, disbelief, and the first timid glimmers of hope. Yuri sat down on the edge of the bed next to Misha. See, it's over, he said, putting his hand on the boy's head. Then he looked up at Artem. Artem, son, I'm sorry for everything that happened, for all these years. I didn't know the truth, but now I do, and if you don't mind, I want to be your father for you and for Misha. His voice trembled, and for the first time in 20 years, a tear rolled down his cheek, but not from sadness, but from a feeling of relief, from a love that proved to be more powerful than family ties and deception. Artem was silent, holding back a lump in his throat before nodding, once with effort. Seeing his brother and father, Misha smiled hesitantly, a faint, timid smile breaking through his tears. Dad, at home, is there enough room for two of us? He whispered barely audibly. Yuri hugged Misha, then held out his hand to Artem. After some hesitation, Artem approached and placed his cold, slender hand in his father's large, strong palm. There's enough room, Yuri whispered, his voice hoarse, as if a heavy burden of guilt and grief had been lifted from him, making room for something new, tender, and priceless. There's enough room in the house for everyone, and for memories of Mom. His gaze fell on the portrait of Anya, which Nikolai had brought from the old apartment and placed on the bedside table. Now her smile radiated peace. She had dreamed that we would be a family, the three of us. A year later, Yuri was sitting at the table on the terrace studying reports, but most of the time his attention was distracted by the sounds of merriment. On the lawn, Misha, visibly stronger and with a blush on his cheeks, was enthusiastically trying to teach the huge, affectionate Saint Bernard his father had given him to fetch a ball. Thanks to a year of intensive therapy and rehabilitation, Artem had become stronger and more confident, and kindly showed his brother the correct throwing technique. The former distance between them had disappeared, replaced by a bond forged by shared grief and a shared home. Lyudmila, having received her guaranteed funds, disappeared into the countryside, where she was surrounded by the unhurried but watchful care of Yuri's lawyers. Dorokov found himself behind bars again, this time for an indefinite term. Yuri's business empire, having survived a brief storm caused by the scandal, became stronger, but now the main indicator of his success was not billions, but the ringing laughter of his sons outside his office window. Yuri put down his papers and went out onto the lawn. Misha, struggling to catch up with him, ran up and panting handed him the ball. Dad, Barsik doesn't understand anything. Help him figure it out, he asked. Artem approached them, unable to hide his smile. He's just lazy, like you are at math, Misha, he teased his brother. Yuri, holding the ball in his hands, looked at the portrait of Ani hanging in a medallion around his neck. She would be proud of both of you, he whispered, and he threw the ball with precision. It flew far away, and Saint Bernard ran after it with a joyful cry. Misha rejoiced, and Artem, whose cough was now less frequent and not so painful, burst out laughing. Yuri hugged his son, squeezing their shoulders. Misha was the son chosen by his heart, warmed by love, who had experienced hellish torments. Artem was his son by blood, born in years of loss, but bringing with him a newfound hope. They were two banks of the same river, merging into one in his soul. "Home," he said, gazing at the setting sun. "We're home, Dad," Misha said softly, leaning into his father. "Yes, father," replied Artem, nodding, and all indecision disappeared from his eyes, leaving only calm determination. Home. The three figures headed for the house, where the aroma of freshly baked pastries mingled with the anticipation of a warm evening. The shadow of a mighty oak tree stretched behind them, as if blessing their path. Anya in the portrait on the terrace seemed to radiate a special warmth. All the experiences, pain, and bitterness of betrayal were left behind, gone into the past. Only the present moment remained, the present, and the family remained, real and unbreakable. Thank you for watching. It really means a lot to me. If you liked it, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos, and be sure to leave a comment. It may be helpful to someone.